Welcome to the Council of Europe in Strasbourg for this new edition of the interview on France 24. I'm here to attend the first edition of the World Forum for Democracy. And I'm joined by the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, Thorbjørn Jagland. Mr. Jagland, thank you for having us here in Strasbourg. It's the first edition of this Forum for Democracy. What is it that you're hoping to achieve?
We are bringing together political leaders and what I call the new emerging voices in the world, young people that are struggling for democracy. We have seen it in the Arab world, for instance, but also to discuss the challenges that we are facing in the so-called established democracies, and they are many.
It's an opportunity, of course, to reflect on the so-called Arab revolutions. You have a lot of actors from these revolutions here who are present in Strasbourg. What's your take on it? A revolution is never black or white. Is it still a positive driving force?
I think so, but it was expected that they would meet many problems, of course, but still the demand for democracy and human rights are there. The young people go to the streets if their expectations are not met, and I mean we have to discuss how Europe and the outside world can help advancing the democratic forces in this area.
Aren't you worried that in some of those countries, religious conservative groups have sort of hijacked the political agenda?
Yes and no. I mean, it depends on what you are meaning with the religious groups, but I mean, it was expected that Islam would play a great role in these revolutions because they were very much the organized forces before the revolutions took place, and so they have to play a role in the society. So let us not be too pessimistic vis-à-vis this.
Let's talk about Syria. Of course, your organization has criticized the world community's response to the crisis. You've said that it has showed relative silence and inaction. What is it that you hope to see happen?
It is a tragedy that the United Nations have not been able to do something there and have a common stand. We see it again and again that the Security Council is split. They play out their own national interest instead of looking at the needs of the population and the role of the United Nations. At least we should have expected more action in order to safeguard the public.
Concretely, what do you want to see happen?
Well, I know
no-fly zones, an intervention on the ground?
No, I think more on the humanitarian issue because, well, Tawakkol Karman spoke about the need for having some safe havens or places where the people can go and get protection. I know that this is a difficult thing, having in mind what happened in Srebrenica, where also United Nations set up such safe havens. But we should have learned from that, and that the international community should have been much stronger on safeguarding the public in Syria.
300,000 Syrian refugees are currently in Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq. Is Europe doing enough to help them?
Well, I don't think so, but I also recognize the difficulties that many countries have nowadays. But I mean, we should show much more solidarity with Turkey, which is taking a heavy burden for this. And that's why it's so important now also to focus on how to stop that this crisis can be spreading to the neighboring countries. That worries me very much what happens in Turkey recently.
Now let's move back to Europe, because after all, the Council of Europe is Europe's largest human rights body. We know that times of political crisis, of economic hardship, always very dangerous when it comes to human rights. Are you worried that once again minorities foreigners are becoming discriminating against across Europe.
Yes, and we see it every day in Europe. And I'm also worried that of the growth of extremist political forces. So I think it is absolutely necessary that the mainstream political parties take much more responsibility for this and find a common ground on how to tackle this situation.
Your view is that those speeches by fascist, by far-right parties are starting to become mainstream across Europe?
It may happen. I mean, and that's why the mainstream political forces have to find a common ground and have a common message to the public. But what would help even more is, of course, that one could find a way of decreasing unemployment, in particular among young people, because we have seen it before that when people get unemployed, they get desperate, frustrated, and then some of them go to extreme political forces.
Now, when I read your report, it looks to me that there's one region in Europe which still has a long way to go when it comes to human rights. It has to be Eastern Europe, 20 years after the fall of communism, and particularly Russia. You've recently published a very harsh report about Russia, which angered Moscow. Is Russia slipping towards authoritarianism?
No, I don't think so. We have to keep in mind the background of Russia, the history. It's a very, very difficult history. And they have gone a long way. But we have also seen recently that some things are going in the opposite direction, and that worries us here. Some of the new laws that have been adopted are not in compliance with the standards that we have in Europe. But I think that this can be corrected, because after all, Russia is a full member of the Council of Europe, and they are committed to the standards that we have here.
But they have responded to your report by saying we're not going to change anything. How can you hope that things will change in Russia?
Well, I don't think that will be the final word, because the final word in Europe today is the Court of Human Rights. And every nation that wants to be in Europe and be part of Council of Europe has to comply with the decisions of this court.
Regarding the female punk group Pussy Riots, what are you telling Russia?
I have given two messages. One is that we have to protect the autonomy of the church. Nobody has a right to enter a church without being allowed to it by the church itself and make political propaganda. That's for sure. But putting young girls in prison for 2 years after 6 months of pre-trial, it's not a thing you do in Europe. It's not according to European standards. It would have been much better with a kind of administrative measure or a fine or something like that, but not putting people in prison.
It looks to me as well, when I read your reports, that another minority is under threat across Europe. It's homosexuals. We saw it in Ukraine with a new law that would make the publicity of homosexuality unlawful. How worried are you about this situation?
I am worried about this, indeed. We are keeping our eyes on it, and we stress the following, namely that we are not asking for particular rights for LGBT people. We are just asking for the same rights for them as for all others. For instance, the right of freedom of expression. They have the right to express themselves, and the right of assembly. They have the right to these gay parades, for instance. And this is, these are basic European values that applies also to LGBT people. It is a matter of modernization. These countries are not at the same level with regard to these things as we are in Western Europe.
Thorbjørn Jagland, you're also the chairman of the Norwegian Nobel Committee, so as such you are responsible for awarding the Nobel Peace Prize, which will be awarded in Oslo on Friday. Now, I know you're not going to disclose the name of the recipient, but may I ask you, what kind of message are you seeking to send this year?
The only thing I can say is that it will be announced on Friday, and I think it will be a very strong message. It has been quite easy for the committee to come to an agreement on who this year. So therefore I'm very happy that we can...
Was it a unanimous decision or?
Yes, as always, it has to be unanimous, but this year I find it quite easy to come to the right conclusion.
In 2009, you awarded the Nobel Peace Prize to US President Barack Obama. In retrospect, was it a sensible choice?
Absolutely. He got the prize mainly because he opened up for negotiations with the Russians on the nuclear shield of Europe, and therefore could open negotiations on the strategic arms, and we got the START agreement. Without this, the whole international disarmament arrangement could have collapsed. So we had to give the prize to Barack Obama.
Will we be surprised on Friday when we hear who's the recipient of the 2012 Nobel Prize?
Well, that I don't know. I will not exclude it.
Okay, well, we'll keep, of course, an eye on the city of Oslo. It will be announced on Friday. Thorbjørn Jagland, Secretary General of the Council of Europe, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching this edition of the interview on France 24. It's time to cross over to Paris for more news.